Market size is 30 billion currently, and with the amount of people that are overweight, this could be a very significant driver in the years to come. We think upwards of 100 billion US dollars annually. What we're seeing is that even the mere threat of tariffs has incentivized branded manufacturers to invest in the US, to invest in new plants, and we think that this is a trend that will continue, especially because the US is such an important market.
A new class of GLP-1s has revolutionized pharmaceutical pathways towards weight loss in the last few years. And now Eli Lilly has said a new pill form of the medication could be launched, quote, by this time next year. For more, we're joined by Diederik Stadig. He's a healthcare economist at ING. Diederik, thanks for joining us. Now, it's been a race towards a pill of these GLP-1s. Eli Lilly has released some late-stage trial results for a drug called orforglipron. What are you making of this data so far?
Stock market was slightly disappointed. A 14% weight loss was forecasted from this pill, and Eli Lilly reported a 12.4% weight loss, which is still quite significant. If you look a few years back, then this was not a class of drugs that existed, and now with the introduction of a pill, this drug becomes accessible to many more people.
Now, GLP-1s have been a major boon to the pharmaceutical industry. Let's take a look at some of the numbers. One look at global GLP-1 sales in 2023 found the global value at $40 billion, but estimates that number could grow to $150 billion by 2032. Now, Diederik, how does this kind of growth compare to other new drugs? Put this in perspective for us.
Well, what we're seeing is obesity and overweight is a very significant problem worldwide. For instance, in Germany, half of the population is overweight, and this comes with significant economic costs. So weight loss drugs could address a real problem in society, and that's why we're seeing quite significant growth at quite a rapid pace. This, of course, also happens in other classes of drugs, but weight loss drugs are one class in which very strong growth is expected over the next few years.
Now, talking about this growth, what are the factors contributing or hindering growth? For example, I would imagine insurance coverage could be one.
Definitely. So that's indeed one of the factors that hinders growth. What is another thing that hinders growth is that there is a shortage of semaglutide worldwide, which is one of the active ingredients in these weight loss drugs. So this prevents a rapid ramp up of production. One thing that, as I just mentioned, is very spurs growth is that obesity is a very, very significant problem in many societies. A lot of people are overweight. As I mentioned, over 50% of adult Germans are overweight. If you look at the US, that number is as high as 2/3 of the adult population. So clearly, weight loss drugs address a need in societies.
And how would a pill form of this drug affect its popularity? Are potential users, and you've outlined very clearly how many potential users there could be, are these potential users clamoring for this kind of medication?
I wouldn't say clamoring, but what is clear is that for a lot of people, an injectable, and that's the way that weight loss drugs are administered currently, is a barrier. Because a lot of people don't like needles. A pill would, for instance, circumvent this problem because you just take one every day, like a paracetamol. Then there's another matter because injectables need to be transported refrigerated. So let's say that you take weight loss medication, you're going on holiday, as many Europeans do this time of year, then you would need this. You would have to take this in a cool box, for instance, on your holiday, which is obviously a barrier to use drugs such as, or weight loss drugs, sorry.
Now, we saw that earlier, that big projected increase in the GLP-1 global sales figure, and it just really made me wonder, is the industry being bolstered by this new so-called wonder drug, or how much of a pillar is it to the industry at the moment?
Well, there's drugs that are that drive much revenue much more than weight loss drugs, but I mean, you just addressed market size is 30 billion currently, and with the amount of people that are overweight, this could be a very significant driver in the years to come. We think upwards of 100 billion US dollars annually, and at that rate, it is a very, very significant driver for the industry for future growth, especially now that many pharmaceutical companies are facing patent cliffs. This is a promising new class of drugs that could drive revenues and growth for years to come.
I want to turn now to some of the actions out of the Trump administration in the United States. Of course, one of the president's favorite actions are tariffs. He has announced a barrage of tariffs on dozens of countries over the course of his presidency. And I'm wondering, Diederik, what do the current rate of tariffs spell for the pharmaceutical industry?
Right. So we've seen different tariffs for different countries. The EU 15%, for instance, Switzerland 39. So there's different rates for different countries. In general, tariffs bring with them quite a bit of uncertainty. And for the pharma sector, especially because Trump reiterated his commitment to increase tariffs on pharmaceuticals very significantly. He mentioned figures such as 150 to 250%. Obviously, this spells uncertainty. And for a lot of pharmaceutical producers, pharma is the most important, or sorry, the US is the most important pharma market. It accounts for roughly 44% of sales globally at only 5% of the population. So pharmaceutical companies cannot afford not to be in the US. And this is especially true for branded drugs, because obviously there's two classes. There's branded drugs and generic drugs. And generic drugs are those drugs without a patent. And what we're seeing is that even the mere threat of tariffs has incentivized branded manufacturers to invest in the US, to invest in new plants. And we think that this is a trend that will continue, especially because the US is such an important market. Now, for the non-patented medication, this is a different story altogether. And we are not seeing much movement here, perhaps for the more complex and more higher margin generics, which is a very limited subset. We are seeing some movement, but overall, a very different story for those two types or class of drugs.
That's an important distinction that you drew there between branded versus generics. And I'm curious, was my understanding, for example, that India is a production hub for a lot of generic drugs, which made me wonder what countries are most vulnerable to US tariffs like this?
Right. So there's perhaps good to take one step back prior to answering that question, because the tariff is ultimately borne by US importers and therefore US consumers. So what we think will happen with a tariff, especially if tariffs are very, very high, like 150%, we think that there will be medicine shortages and price rises. So medicine shortages most certainly in the generic section. And to give you a frame of reference for how important generics actually are, over 90% of US prescriptions are a generic drug. Those are mostly manufactured overseas, so in India. So there's such a strategic dependence. The US administration has taken note of this dependence, and it has turned to tariffs to solve this. Now, this has resulted in investment in the branded space, but where the dependence is in the generics, we're not seeing a lot of movement there. So a tariff there would simply result in the US market becoming unprofitable to generic manufacturers, which then means that medicine shortages will occur in the US. For branded, and this is where we see movement, as mentioned, there are companies, loads of companies. We estimate over 250 billion US dollars in investment by branded manufacturers over the past few months. And there we see that European pharma manufacturing is vulnerable, especially Irish manufacturing. A lot of pharmaceuticals are manufactured there, especially for the US market. And so we think that Ireland is most exposed to US tariffs on pharmaceuticals. Other countries, Germany, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, obviously not part of the European Union, Switzerland, same, but also pharmaceutical manufacturing hubs and therefore exposed to tariffs on the US.
Now, you've said that if tariffs continue, we will see price increases, we will see medicine shortages. But stepping back, it seemed like a lot of economists, for example, were saying that with these tariffs, we would see inflation in the US really increase. But we just got new data this week saying that inflation isn't dramatically increasing, at least not yet. So from your viewpoint, how would you explain to viewers what makes you so certain?
That's a great question, Cassandra, and I understand where that's coming from. What we have seen for pharma, for instance, is that in the or because pharmaceutical companies expected tariffs, we have seen massive stockpiling in the US. So we have seen over the past couple of months the US importing many more pharmaceuticals than it would normally consume. So this means that there's stocks buildup, a buildup of stocks of pharmaceutical products in the US, and this is now going to be slowly come into the market at old prices, so pre-tariffs. So therefore, we have not yet seen a price effect for pharmaceuticals, but that will come later down the line. Like as these stocks run out and the pharmaceutical sector is hit by tariffs, we will see gradual price increases. And again, gradual because obviously not all pharmaceutical products are imported and do face a tariff. So as stocks run out, we will gradually see price increase for imported medication. Consumers will notice that either when they purchase over-the-counter pharmaceuticals or differently when they pay healthcare insurance premiums. And that's a gradual process and it doesn't show up overnight. So that's why we haven't seen an inflationary effect yet.
As I started getting into the research on GLP-1s, and I'm by no means an expert here, I was surprised to learn that the research that was fundamental to this wonder drug, as many people are calling it, was actually National Institute of Health research, partially funded at least by the National Institute of Health, into anglerfish. And so I'm sorry, but follow me down the rabbit hole here for just a second, because President Trump's administration has cut at least $1.8 billion worth of National Institute of Health grants so far. And as we got into this research, I was just really wondering, is the industry concerned that due to this massive amount of cuts in such a short period of time, that the next so-called miracle drug might now be not only farther away, but potentially out of reach?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cassandra. We've written about this extensively, and to answer your question, the cutting of funding for high-risk research projects is one of the things that the US was a worldwide leader in. Pharmaceutical innovation would have looked very differently without the US over the past years. So to answer your question, yes, these cuts threaten the future innovative capacity of the sector, and that in turn might have ramifications for drugs that are created down the line. Now, what we have seen in the interim is that China is slightly stepping into this void. In the past 10 years, the amount of new molecules that come from the Chinese biotech sector have increased dramatically, from 4 to 24% from 2014 to 2024. So it might be the case that the next sort of blockbuster drug isn't a US one, but is a Chinese one.
Diederik Stadig, ING healthcare economist, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.